Good morning everybody, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to Ork Kommandos in Warhammer 40k, made by Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer. This is going to be part of the Cronan de Canon playlist. You'll see it as I add it to my reaction playlist. And remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer, the links are going to be in the description below. And yes, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Between the time when chaos broke Cadia and the return of the sons of the Emperor, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, Cronan, destined to bear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. Continued from Cronan de Canon, story so far. Now, things had not exactly been going swimmingly in the camp of the mighty Canin War, and that was quite the understatement. For without their lord, their master, their chief, without Cronan, it had evolved into a brawl of unexpected brutality.
Unexpected? I think it's expected, you know. When a war boss has been defeated in a war, the rest of the orcs start turning on each other and saying that I'm going to become the new war boss of the war, but it doesn't work out that way. Then they have infightings and civil wars amongst each other. So yeah, it's expected. It's tradition.
Well, to say that brutality was unexpected is a bit much, I suppose, as that is truly the orky thing to be, after all. Was it not Gork himself that said, "To be cunning is to be orky, to be brutal is to be divine"? Or was it Mork? Oh well, some things are inscrutable, lost in the sands of time. Like why it was necessary to have grots, let alone snots, in so many numbers. Yet it was a hard truth that no war could exist without an abundance of these seemingly pointless creatures. When I say pointless, but that again is a bit of an exaggeration, for grots and snots did indeed taste delicious, and were as a second food staple, after the mighty and useful squigs, of course. Well, the ones for eating, the common garden squig, as every youth knows that there are a multitude of different breeds of squig, and some are definitely not for the eating. Like,
especially the ones that explode. Don't eat those ones. You will explode.
If you were to go and attempt to eat a boom or sploding squig, well, it would not bode well for your dentures to do.
Because I remember from last week's episode, when Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer was discussing about these explosive squigs that the orcs use. Those are the types that you just don't eat. And, ones that have got toxins, ones that are, infused with warp energy. Don't eat those ones, yeah.
So, of that I can assure you. Nor would the consumption of a weird squig do one's mental faculties any good, and dining on bowel torrent squigs is a most unpleasant and messy affair. Now the snots were having a hard time unto themselves, as the grots were more than willing to share their woes with their diminutive cousins. And what woes they were. The grot numbers had only just returned to normal after their excessive use in the last month, lines dead marking no think zones, and the popular craze of origgrotmy, of course, their use in mass cogitations. Now this last element was what had caused their most recent plight, for it was simple and plain to all orcs worthy of the name. Their chief, their boss, Cronan de Canon, was so mighty, so cunning, that it was ludicrous to believe that he had made any error in his strategic and tactical acumen and understanding of his situation. But Kronan had been captured by a lucky hit from the despicable enemy warboss, Tooth Smasher. Hence it was posited by the Greater War that the error could not be his. Ergo, it must be the fault of those around him. And all now looked for the root cause. For there to be a proper lynching, the cause would have to be something smaller and less fighty than those knobs and bosses at the top.
So the Groths? These poor things.
For they would probably make any lynch mob scatter swiftly when they unleashed their might. Not that orcs would avoid a fight, of course. That would be blasphemy. A profanity to the very spirit and beings of their gods, Gork and Mork. More to put it, that rage that needed releasing also had to be done so in a way that did not utterly destroy the war. Hence it was that some bright spark put it about that it was surely the fault of the Grots. Had Kronan not used them in his deliberations, his planning and scheming, his mighty cogitations? Had he not used them to augment his cunning? Therefore, if the thinking had failed, then surely it was the fault of the treacherous Grots who were supposed to be helping.
Guys, the population of the Groths have just stabilized. Don't tip them over again to extinction. You guys need them.
Had they secretly conspired to be less effective, to cripple or confuse the Great One's ventures?
You guys are thinking too much. You guys are thinking too much about, possible betrayals of the Groths. No.
And from this simple decision, a bloodbath ensued. But this time, the Grots seemed to be ready for it. None knew quite why. Their response: to attempt to satiate the orcs' rage on others. Hence it was that the Grots took a bit of a steer from their orky masters and performed metasnotosis. It was the changing of the snots on a fundamental level to make them appear like Grots. For the few bright sparks in the Grots hoped that the massacre might only go on for so long. Thus they would give the orcs something to take out their wrath on. The runt herds were actually quite important, you see, so they were more involved in the greater struggles for dominance. So it was mostly the youths that were hunting down and punishing the Grots, and these youths were far less discerning than the older, more mature orcs. And it was not long before the fringes of the camp were exposed to the spectacle of smaller youth orcs chasing around snots that had undergone metasnotnosis. Now some might think that the stapling of multiple snots together and rolling them in rags or rugs so that only the top snot's head and the bottom snot's feet protruding from their wrappings would not fool even a youth. But it was dark. It was a time of war. It was pandemonium. And, if we can be honest, which I always hope to be, the youths were not too bothered if it were actually snots or grots in the first place, for they were doing little more than performing a minor play. A copy of the greater confrontation that was transpiring in the camp centre. For while bonfires of snots and grots lit the edges of the camp, the centre was a thing of horror.
As the war continues to eat itself alive, whenever Kronan returns, he's just gonna come back to a decimated war. This is disappointing, really. But like I've said before, this is what orcs do. Yeah. So.
Or hilarity, depending on your worldview. Most involved thought it was indeed the latter, as the elements of the cunning war fell on each other. It started when, in the absence of Kronan, who had surely been slain by now, Git Squisher McMurder proclaimed himself the new big boss. A mistake, to be sure.
Yeah, a very big mistake. But you'll learn. You'll learn from it. Probably you'll die.
For this elicited an immediate response from Madna Kunkelstein, of course, who then began to use his mighty foot of Gork indiscriminately on the camp. Huge spectral feet, hundreds of meters in size, slamming down all over the camp, crushing all beneath them.
Where is Daka von Smashhoven? Because I know he's loyal. He's not going to proclaim himself as a as the new war boss. I don't think so. He was very loyal, especially like from the previous episode. So where is he?
But being candid, this did slay many an orc, but it was more for show, really. It was scary, to be certain, but it didn't do half the amount of damage to the numbers that it may have looked, and Gitskusha was well aware of this. It was for scaring humies, really, but it certainly added to the confusion in the camp. Now the situation got worse very swiftly, as these sort of things are wont to do in a large congregation of orcs. For the larger bosses and their knobs were seeing a golden opportunity that may never come again, and it was no exaggeration to say that near 1 in 3 bosses now believed they could take the war for themselves. Gitskusha was very effective, of course, but he was no Cronan. Certainly not in cunning, for no orc but the prophet himself was, but nor in size or brutality either. And so the camp broke into a score of fighting bosses, all attempting to win Cronan's golden chair, his golden thong, for themselves. And without Cronan and his bodyguard, his Black Legion, to regain control, the war was literally tearing itself apart. Which many agreed was what Gorka Mork would have wanted, and it was hilarious to boot, especially when employing said boot to the head of other orcs, of course. But there was one orc who did not see the amusement, did not see the opportunity.
Daka van Smashhofen.
He saw the death of the war. For Cronan had taken him deep into his council, whatever that means, and had revealed his suspicions about the other war, the speed war of Tooth Smasher. The red hue to some of the skins of the envoys they had received, which was unorky in the extreme. Both the merest existence of the embassage and the harrowing mutation of some of the orcs' skin to that reddish hue, which could only mean one thing. These vile heathens had turned their backs on Gork and Mork. They were milksops who turned to chaos. And if that were true, then the speed war would inevitably fall. It was how these things went. And so it was that Daka von Smashhoven acted. He would not allow his people to be drawn down into the dung heap of worshipping weak and pitiful gods of humies and pointies. No, he would act. Thus it was that Daka von Smashhoven left the camp mid-crumpin. Many of his closest adherents had forwarded that it was he that should be contending for the place of boss of bosses.
He's not interested. If he were interested, he would have killed Cronan, when the Speed War were trying to capture him. He could have killed him there, but he didn't. And, he's loyal, so I don't think he's going to do anything like that.
But he had just ignored this charge from his flyboys, and told them to move their vehicles as far from the main war as possible until he returned. There was some disappointment and no small measure of annoyance, to be certain, but after a few decapitations and crumpins, he had persuaded them of the merit of his plan, and the winds of war hopped into their cockpits and relocated. Well, after dropping a few bombs on the camp as they flew over. But they did not want to be entirely without any action in the air.
Man, these people are chaos. Wow. Oh gosh. Orks.
Action. So, as Daka von Smashhoven took his last look down at the cunning war, he was both entertained and slightly vexed in equal measure when he saw the carpet bombing his flyboys enacted on the camp. But he had to conclude that it was worth it after all, because it did create such huge explosions and fire and fun, boys flying in the air and entire swathes of the camp ablaze, a sight to warm the cockles of the heart. Daka then turned and went on his dark way, a shadow in the night, because to find shadows, one had to become a shadow oneself. Hence it was that Daka von Smashhoven crept into the foreboding forests nearby in hunt for the hunters. It was not actually that long before he was found, for it was definitely he who was found by the orcs he was coming to see, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think he allowed himself to be found, Yeah.
Daka von Smashhoven had walked and stalked for hours, but had seen hide nor hair of the orcs he was attempting to locate. He now stood on a rather convincing grassy knoll, his face beaming up at the two moons that leered down at him, basking in their light, when he heard a rustle. Now he may have heard the rustle, but he was soon to discover that this was just a way of gaining his attention, for as he turned to face the source of the disruption, he was confronted by a wall of green. Standing right next to him, fanning out behind in a seeming forest of their own, were huge orcs covered in branches and muck, dung and slime, all so that they were indeed utterly camouflaged against their backdrop. It was as if the woods had sprung to life and just materialized behind him.
This is interesting. These types of orcs seem to be like, as the title says, commando, ork commandos. Yes, you know, they use camouflage, they use stealth as a tool or as a weapon against their enemies. This is different compared to all the other orcs who are loud, who are aggressive, who are out there. You know, you will see them, you know, from a kilometer away. You know, you will see them coming towards you. But it seems like these orcs have decided to use the shadows, silence, and, you know, camouflage to defeat their enemies. And probably it kind of instills a certain type of fear around them, because, you know, usually with orcs you would associate them with loud noises and stuff like that, but these orcs, they're silent and deadly, and yeah, that is just something different. You know, you don't even know how to approach such an enemy, because when you think about orcs, you think about them being loud all the time. So yeah, this is different. This is actually very different. But would other orcs consider this as a weak stance, or is it something that's also strong in their eyes, you know? Yeah. I'm just wondering about that. Because, you know, in the culture of the orcs, you know, to be respected, to be recognized, you need to be out there on the battlefield, you know, shouting, "Wah!" and fighting with your weapons and stuff like that. You know, you need to be bombastic that way. But these guys are not like that, it seems. Yeah. Okay.
And somewhere Tolkien was happy. Von Smashoven was acutely aware that he was only alive because someone had recognized him. It could have been the proximity of so many previously invisible boys. It could have been the way they stood back from him with a tiny bit of war. Or it could have been their leader, who belched hard and stated, "We would have slit you good if you weren't the great duck of Von Smashoven." At that, the air was filled with an eruption of gaseous bottom burps, as each of the orcs had been holding in their fracas while hiding from this intruder to their realm. Their leader had spoken. They had all stood and revealed themselves, so the need for disguise was gone. Hence was the night broken, with a sound like a chainsword being let off during the silence of a sermon. Dacre von Smashoven did not choke, no matter how chewy the air had become. He did not wince or even comment, as the combined expulsions assailed his nostrils and confronted his very eyes. He was a boss, and bosses did not gag or choke on mere flatulence alone. When the welcome breeze rustled more of the leaves and, thankfully, blew away their miasma, he spoke. He spoke of honour, of orkiness, of the enemy and of cunning, of how their lord Cronan had not been beaten as long as there were any who held his name as their guide. Of course, this phenomenal display of eloquence was utterly lost on the wide-eyed drooling commandos. So he then tried a more direct tack, knowing that the intellect of the commandos was actually quite formidable for his race.
I mean, just imagine, you come there with a beautiful speech, you know, you are trying to appeal to their honor, to their respect for their war boss, you know, saying that, you know, Cronan is still okay, he needs your help, he needs your support. But then these guys are like, what is this guy talking about? What is he saying? He's talking a lot of big words here, you know? Oh man. To be an orc is really difficult, guys. I'm sorry. Even to be the leader of the orcs. And I know I've said this before, that, you know, being a war boss must be easy. But maybe sometimes it's just extremely difficult. This is one of those times when it's extremely difficult. Yeah. Oh gosh.
He realized it was just the angle he had chosen. the vectors of his oratory sallies that had been at fault. Thus it was that he prevailed upon them to follow him in his schemes, by stating simply, "Do yous wanna go raid in the other camp then?" As predicted, this did the trick. Such potent enticements could not be ignored, and the commandos all sniffed and nodded in agreement, and then went about gathering their number from the surrounding forests.
As easy as that.
It was then an odd factor that Ducker noted, for at his side also appeared a huge ball with teeth. He was easily recognizable as the largest and meanest and bitiest of all the squigs in the entire War.
Tiddles, you're still okay, you're still alive.
It was none other than Tiddles himself, the pet of Kronen de Cunnin. Sniffing the area around Dacker von Smashhoven, Tiddles cocked his leg and marked him. Now, this was not something that Kronen would have ever permitted, of course, but Dacker was almost brought to tears by the loyalty and passion of this squig. He had mocked Dacker. Did Tiddles know, sense on some instinctive level, that he was attempting to save his master, to rescue Kronen?
Probably.
Foot he belted into the squig was just enough to let him know who was actually boss, but not enough to indicate that he actually wanted a fight. The squig, large as it was, took the hoofing without complaint, and merely growled at Dacker von Smashhoven for a moment to make certain no more chastisements were coming in his direction. And thus it was that Dacker von Smashhoven was soon travelling across the plains and forests of Aquilonia, with multiple thousand commandos in tow, Tiddles, previously known as Nutcruncher, at his side. He would strike at the speed War and try to work out if Kronen was still alive. He had to be. For the survival of all orcs on Aquilonia, for the greater War, for the honour of the great gods Gork and Mork. He had to be.
Look, if Kronen does not make it, and the Horde, sorry guys, the War, is dismantled and defeated and routed, and, the humans clean up what's ever left, the Orks are still going to come back, because the spores from their bodies are going to be planted in the ground, and then they're going to grow, and new Orks will come out. So, it's not over for the Orks as a whole. As a species on the planet of Aquilonia. They'll come back. It's just that Kronen de Cunnin and his War, they will be finished. I don't know if there'll be another cunning, war boss like him, but essentially the cunning War and the speed War will be gone, and new Ork generations will come out. I don't know when. I don't think it'll be immediate, but yeah, they'll come back.
Continued after the law. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and units of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And at the dawn of Orktober, we go into one of the most interesting of all of the Ork units, one that has recently been re-released in all their glory, with new models that fit their aesthetic and activity down to the very ground. Of course, I can only be talking of the ORK Kommandos. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Kommandos. Kommandos epitomize the orky virtue of low cunning. Nothing makes a commando happier than creeping up on an unsuspecting enemy, his mate slithering through the undergrowth at his side. When the time is right, the commandos will burst from their hiding places, slashing, stabbing, and shooting at their stunned prey before they have a chance to strike back. Commandos are viewed with suspicion by the majority of boys. On the rare occasions they are viewed at all. These specialists do not socialize with other greenskins. They sometimes go into self-imposed exile for months at a time, and in more extreme cases, even permanently, divorce themselves from their tribe. Commandos prize intelligence and initiative as some of them are even able to read. Not for them the thrill of a mass charge or a turbo-powered race to the front line in a badly made truck. Instead, a commando gets his kicks from slitting throats and spreading panic behind enemy lines before launching a perfectly timed ambush. The horrified look on the faces of their prey, who assumed they would be able to see the orc attack a mile off, is tremendously rewarding to the members of a commando mob.
Yeah, I knew that this is how they're going to operate, and how even their enemies are going to expect that because they're orcs, they're just going to charge at them, screaming out loud and, shooting their guns in the air. But it's different with the commandos. These guys are in the shadows, they're in the darkness, they're with camouflage, they sow chaos in a different manner than their other orc brethren. This is quite interesting.
These scare tactics are epitomized by Snicksrot of the Red Skull Commandos, whose name is a byword for terror upon Armageddon. On the field of battle, commandos will assassinate sentries and destroy gun emplacements to give the rest of the lads a better chance of reaching the enemy lines unscathed. It is common for each commando to have a specialist role within the mob and have a nickname appropriate to this role, such as Fireboy or Throat Slit. This organized and militaristic outlook means that young Stormboys often develop into commandos, instead of rejoining the right-thinking orc boys at the heart of each warband. The tools of the commando's trade are subtle by orc standards. They place great faith in soot-blackened blades and camouflage, painting their skin with stripes of blood, dirt and dung, so they blend in with their surroundings. This practice is shocking to a normal orc, who considers the idea of covering up his greenness unnatural. Only the blood axes truly see the value of such caution. Some commandos are even more inventive with their camouflage, attaching foliage to their uniforms or employing cunning disguises. Well, cunning by orky standards anyway. Commandos do occasionally employ heavy weapons, which they reveal only when they are in position to cripple a battle tank or slaughter an enemy squad that has broken from cover. Boss Snickrot, the Green Ghost. The infamous orc hunters of the Armageddon Imperial Guard are afraid of one orc, and one orc alone. In the dark nights of the equatorial jungles between Prime and Secundus, these grizzled veterans whisper tales of Boss Snotskrit, the Stalker. They tell of a killer who slips through the jungle like a ghost, who can pass through throttle vine groves without disturbing a single leaf. They tell of a savage hunter who lives for vengeance, whose eyes blaze with the devilish light of hatred.
He is impressive and frightening.
Finally, they tell of his victims, left to bleed to death, with their eyes put out and their scalps ripped free from their skulls. Boss Snickrot was a commando in high regard at the time of Gaskell's original invasion, and his was amongst the first of the orc tribes to navigate the green hell that separates Armageddon Prime from Armageddon Secundus. The sea of jungle was vast, and Snickrot's commandos soon separated from the main tribe. Straying towards Cerberus base, the majority of his tribe fell foul of the Imperial Guard jungle fighting specialists stationed in the heart of the Verdant Realm. Snickrot ordered his boys to withdraw, vowing to conquer the environment before they turned their attention to the human bases. Snickrot had learned his lesson well. He pledged to fight a guerrilla war from the very heart of the jungle, stripping his kit down to the bare minimum so that the color of his skin blended in with the jungle itself.
I think the Imperium of Man should have burnt down the entire forest, burned it to ashes, so that they don't have any form of camouflage. Although they would have used the ash, I think. The orcs, they would have used the ash, put it on their bodies, and then, just dig underground and just pop their eyes just a bit, just to see what's going on. And then if the enemy does come, then they would jump out and shoot at them. So maybe burning the forest wouldn't have helped, maybe.
He and his commandos became one with the tangled vegetation, their tough hides and strong metabolism giving them a natural resistance to the lethal defenses of the nightmarish environment. Snickrot and his lads refined their already prodigious abilities in stealth and sabotage until they were able to slip into the Astra Militarum barracks and kill the residents in their sleep. Thus began a campaign of terror and psychological warfare that has plagued the Imperial war effort upon Armageddon ever since.
Imagine, guys, an orc killing you in your sleep. That is just so It's weird. I've never heard of such a thing. An orc killing you in your sleep. No. Usually, they would be screaming and shouting, going, ah, before they kill you. But these guys, they just come in silently into the camp. They kill you in your sleep. That is just so different. Wow.
Snickrot's Red Skull Commandos, so called because of their habit of scalping their victims and spreading the hot blood onto their own heads, were still at large when Ghazghkull returned 50 years later. By this time, the legend of Snickrot had spread to the furthest hives. Some spoke of a ghost who drank the blood of his victims in the dark of the night. Some told of a murderous beast who wore the dog tags of his numerous victims upon his chain-wrapped forearms so he could whisper their names to the jungle moon. Some told of his deadly knives and how they tasted the throats of colonels, nobles and courtesans alike.
He looks like someone from Universal Soldier. You know that movie called Universal Soldier with Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph something. I forgot his name. Yeah, but he looks like one of those guys. Or maybe even Sylvester Stallone. When he was acting in that movie called Rambo, I think. Yes, I think it was called Rambo. Yeah, he looks like Rambo. Yeah.
All across Armageddon, in the flickering twilight of the hives, mothers scare their children into obedience with stories about the stalker Snickrot. Each of the gruesome tales has a basis in truth. To this day, Snickrot is one of the most feared of all greenskins, and even the orc hunters pray to the Emperor that it is not their neck that Snickrot buries his knives in next. Of late, a surprising number of orcs have been given cause to hope for the same thing. With the demons of chaos spilling into Armageddon, Imperial and Greenskin forces have been compelled, in a few extreme cases, to temporarily set aside hostilities to fight off the greater threat. Snickrot is disgusted by such compromise, seeing it as weakness, and is quick to punish those orc leaders guilty of it. More than one...
What do you mean? You guys have to work together against a common enemy. It's not like you guys are not going to fight against each other once that enemy is defeated. Yeah. It's cool that you guys are working together for this specific issue alone. Yeah. Oh gosh.
Nob has been dragged into the shadows, his severed head turning up on a spike shortly afterwards as a warning against mobbing up with humies. End quote. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to Commandos, and know that there will be plenty more Ork content this month, in Orktober. Can't wait. Chains Gone especially, but it's proving to be quite a technical challenge, so apologies for the delays. If you have enjoyed my
no worries
silly tales, then please consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. If you see the worth in what we are doing, then do also consider joining our Patreon, or giving the video a share if that is beyond your present scope. It would be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo. And back to the story. They had arrived. Dacre von Smashhoven crept through the landscape along with a multitude of commandos, Magnus the Strangler, their leader, at his side. Magnus explained that usually there would be a lot of undergrowth for them to get even closer, but that something had disrupted the usual warp and weft of the land. Something had seemed to drain all of the vitality out of the foliage and other flora around the camp of the Speedwar.
It's the chaos, worshipping orcs. They're doing something. They're corrupting the land.
As Dacre von Smashhoven looked around, he did indeed note the strangly and rather sad-looking scrub around him. It was as Magnus the Strangler had stated. It was now a dry and lifeless place, where before it had been so verdant. It seems that the Speedwar had more than a little nastiness hidden within it. But then, Dacre knew exactly what was responsible, or, more to the point, whom. It was the leader of the Chaos Scum, their boss, Tober. His filth had permeated the very grounds, the very holy sod of Aquilonia. Not that Dacre was a budding horticulturist or anything. In fact, he gave less thought to trees and grass than he gave to squigs, which was to say none at all. But it was a wonderful new reason to despise his opponents. For who really wants to crump anything if they do not despise it? Oh, the rush of the crumping is all well and good, but a lovely tinge of revenge, or hatred, added a certain je ne sais quoi to the entire activity. Not something to be missed, really. Well, not if one had tasted its heady draught before. And after all the victories that Kronan had given to Dacre von Smashhoven over the hated Humies, it was definitely something he now required to really enjoy the violence. And a debt he was not willing to ignore, no matter how his orky mind usually worked. It was for this reason alone that he was here, outside of his mighty craft of the skies, hunched over and covered in camouflage.
Yeah, he's a special kind of orc. Dacre von Smashhoven, he's a different type of orc. Special.
Now Dacre was not entirely sure that quite so much dung was required to attach the scant foliage he had been covered in previously, but his commando brethren had insisted it was just enough. Nor was he sure that the ritual of being spat on by every member of the squad was to his liking, to be accepted as one of them before the hunt, of course.
That is so disgusting. Ew. Oh my gosh.
But he figured he would never have to do this sort of thing again. And if he still felt aggrieved after they had regained Kronan, well, later on he could just round them up and put them in a field and bomb the commandos. And thus it was that they crept towards the camp. The commandos stealthily approached the pickets and made them disappear, knives dragging across jugulars in utter silence. They pushed on. Inside the enemy camp there was much celebration still going on, even after a few days. The elation of the victory over Kronan was palpable. It made them sloppy. Of that Dacre von Smashhoven was sure, for they had penetrated as far into the camp as is possible, without there being a mild squealing. Perhaps a poor choice of words, but it was how it was. As Dacre von Smashhoven cleared the main buildings on his hands and knees, as were most of them, he espied a very excited Tiddles hoofing off towards the central section of the camp, and as he followed the cheeks of the squig disappearing into the distance, his eye was drawn towards a central tree, and a scene that filled him with both hope and fear in equal measure. For there he was, Kronan. He still lived. Hope was still alive. But he was broken and beaten, and was hung unceremoniously from that central tree. Picking up pace, Dacre and the commandos now broke into a jog, then a sprint, as they saw their target, and little betwixt them. They could do it. Alas, it was then that Tiddles managed to bump slap bang into a huge red orc. The thing was near carried off its feet, but righted itself on a tent pole, and then looked at the fleeing madly happy squig, only to then look at where it had come from, and he gazed directly into the eyes of Dacre von Smashhoven. With no hesitation whatsoever, his jaw dropped and a huge bellow came out of it. The alarm had been rung out and was carried across the entire camp within minutes. And that was the end of that. For walls of red orc squigs and even gruts came pouring out of their tents and the broken old structures that they now infested and barreled towards the commandos like an avalanche.
But they're still sprinting. They're still gonna push through, I think. Hopefully.
Despite putting up a valiant attempt to punch through, it was when Meganob and Flashgit, in their mega armor, appeared between their forces and Kronan that they knew it was a lost cause. Despite how close they had come, they were not going to make it. Tiddles had avoided the oncoming wave of flesh and hidden in the camp, but Daka von Smashoven and his allies were not so fortunate, and took eye-watering casualties on their way back out of the camp. And away.
You must live, Daka, you must live. I don't trust any of the other generals. It's all on you now.
Into the night. But the speed war did not even chase them. They did not care to. They had Kronan, and they had victory. They did not need to hunt down a few stragglers. And so it was that Daka von Smashoven trudged back to the camp, shoulders rounded and his step heavy. Now many would believe that this was due to his failure, but nothing could be closer to the truth, for he had seen his boss, knew he was alive. He knew he could get him out. He knew it. The thing that made his shoulders sag and his sighing so deeply was the thought of having to meet with the Talker. Ugh. For none else could possibly perform the task he could not do himself. Hence, von Smashoven would have to meet and then entreat with Chains Grond.
Man, Chains Grond is suited up. Look at him. Oh, he looks good.
Ork of Mystery.
Okay guys, that's it with Ork Kommandos in Warhammer 40,000, made by Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer. Yeah, the Kommandos are an interesting bunch. They are totally different from their brethren in terms of how they initiate their attacks against their enemies, and you know how they slit the throats of their enemies while they're still asleep. That is very unique and also very scary. You know, how they also adapt themselves to their environment and use it as camouflage as well, fighting against humans or whoever else. That's also very interesting. And then of course Daka von Smashoven, you know, him going to the Ork Kommandos, asking for help to save their war boss. And you know, they were close. They were very close to saving him, but the Speed War came in numbers to, you know, cut their rescue attempt. And now Daka has to make up a new plan. Hopefully it will work out, and hopefully Kronan is not too badly injured that he won't be able to escape. You know, like he'll still be able to walk and, you know, run away with Daka von Smashoven and everybody else. But until that time comes, you know, it was really enjoyable to listen to Baldermort talk about Daka, you know, having this commitment to try and save Kronan, you know, even being spat on by the Kommandos, you know, going with Tiddles, and Tiddles supporting and trusting Daka von Smashoven, and you know, all of them just going out there just to try and save the war boss's life. And yeah, this is good. There's hope. You know, the war chief or the war boss is still alive, and if he's still alive, there is still a chance for them to try and attempt to save his life. So yeah, I'm happy for Daka being here and trying something, unlike all the other generals who are, you know, having their little party or infighting party in the main camp. You know, it was crazy to hear that some of the pilots, you know, dropped their bombs, dropped their bombs on the wall. Like, that is just so funny, really. Like, why? Orks. Oh gosh. Okay, guys, that's it for this morning. Remember, if you want to check out my sorry, not mine, but if you want to check out the original video as well as Baldermort's guide to Warhammer, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I'll see you guys next time. Okay, good morning.